Okay, so let's say you want to take your Laravel app, from like it works to battle ready.
Hmm.
You want an application that can handle pretty much anything, right?
Yeah.
Well, this deep dive we're doing is going to be all about putting the advice in this ebook, Battle Ready Laravel Lite, into practice.
Okay.
We're basically getting like a cheat sheet from a seasoned Laravel developer here.
Nice.
So,
It's interesting, when we think of battle ready, a lot of developers think about, super complex algorithms or some really intricate infrastructure,
yeah.
but it all starts with a solid foundation. And that foundation is auditing your application.
Okay, auditing makes sense, but what are we really looking for when we audit?
Right.
What are the tools or techniques we should be using to figure out, how healthy our Laravel application is?
Think of it like a health checkup, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for your code,
Okay.
and just like a doctor would use different tools, we've got automated and manual approaches.
Gotcha. Okay, so let's start with automated auditing. What are some of the big names in the automated auditing world for Laravel?
So two of the most valuable tools are PHP Insights and Enlightn.
Okay.
PHP Insights analyzes your entire code base.
Okay.
It categorizes the code and gives you an overview of potential issues.
Okay.
It's like getting a report card. It flags things like code complexity or maybe security hotspots that need some attention.
So it's not just about surface level issues like you have an unused import.
Right.
It's more about like the structural integrity of the code.
Exactly. And Enlighten takes it even further, particularly with performance and security.
Okay.
This tool is tailored specifically for Laravel.
Nice.
So it goes beyond just generic analysis,
Yeah.
gives you Laravel-specific insights.
Okay.
So for example, it can help you pinpoint N+1 query problems
Yeah.
or identify potential mass assignment vulnerabilities.
Wow. Okay, so Enlighten sounds like it could save a lot of headaches down the road.
Definitely.
But automated tools can only go so far, right? So when does manual auditing become super important, and what skills or strategies should we use when we're, diving into that code ourselves?
Absolutely. Automated tools are great as a starting point, but there are certain nuances that they might miss, especially when it comes to security.
Right.
For instance, raw database queries.
Okay.
These can be powerful,
Yeah.
but they need to be handled very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they're susceptible to SQL injection attacks.
Right.
So manually auditing those queries for potential vulnerabilities is critical.
So it's about understanding the potential pitfalls of some of these coding practices and knowing when to apply that deeper level of scrutiny.
Right. And another area where manual auditing is really valuable is authorization checks.
Okay.
You need to make sure that the right people have access to sensitive information.
Mm-hmm.
Automated tools might not catch incomplete authorization checks.
Okay.
So manually verifying that those checks are robust and comprehensive is super important.
That makes sense. So let's say we've thoroughly checked our code base, we've found any potential issues. Now we're ready to build in some safety nets.
Okay.
Let's talk about testing.
Testing is absolutely your safety net. It lets you confidently make changes without worrying about unexpectedly breaking things.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that tests do more than just catch bugs.
Okay.
They encourage you to take a more modular approach with your code, which leads to better organization and maintainability in the long run.
So almost like tests are forcing us to be better developers from the start?
Absolutely. And well-written tests can also serve as documentation.
Okay.
They clearly show how different parts of the code are supposed to behave.
Gotcha. So before we write any tests, we need a solid testing strategy.
Yes, exactly.
This isn't about just testing everything at once. It's more about prioritizing.
Mm-hmm.
What are the mission-critical parts of the application that would cause the most problems if they failed?
Right.
And then we can start there.
Absolutely.
Now, I know there are different types of tests, each with its own purpose. Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of walk me through that, that hierarchy of tests
Sure.
and when each one comes into play?
So you've got unit tests for individual components.
Okay.
Then you have feature tests to see how these different components interact.
Mm-hmm.
And integration tests to test how your application interacts with external systems.
Okay.
And of course, don't forget about UI testing with Dusk.
Yeah, Dusk seems like a very interesting one.
Yeah.
It's not just testing the logic, but the actual user experience.
Exactly. Dusk is like a robot that's interacting with your application through the browser, clicking buttons, filling out forms,
Wow.
and making sure everything works as expected from the user's point of view.
Nice.
It uses pages and selectors to hone in on specific elements so you have robust and maintainable UI tests.
So it's like having an automated QA tester that's always working.
Precisely. And with a tool like Dusk, you can catch those small UI bugs that might slip through the cracks otherwise.
Right.
It's a really valuable part of a comprehensive testing strategy. This is all great information, but even with the best auditing and testing, bugs can still pop up.
Yeah, that's true.
So how do we go from being reactive to proactive when it comes to dealing with bugs?
That's where robust error reporting and uptime monitoring come in.
Okay.
These tools are like having a 24/7 watch in your application so they can alert you to problems before they get out of control.
Okay, so we've talked about auditing, testing bug, fixing, upgrading dependencies. Let's finish this part by talking about TDD.
Okay.
It seems kind of counterintuitive to write tests before you write the code.
Yeah.
How does this work in the real world, and what are the actual benefits of doing it this way?
It might feel strange at first, but writing tests before the code makes you think about the problem in a different way.
Okay.
You have to consider how you'll test the functionality before you implement it.
Right.
And this leads to cleaner, more modular code.
Okay.
Plus, it's really satisfying to see those tests go from red to green. It's like a mini victory each time.
I can definitely see the appeal in that. It's almost like you're setting a goal and then working towards it. You already know what success looks like.
Right. It's kind of like setting goals and achieving them.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about removing dead code.
Okay.
It's like decluttering your house. It frees up space and makes things easier to manage.
I think every developer has that, like, junk drawer of code that they're afraid to touch.
Yeah.
But why is removing dead code so important?
Dead code can make your code base harder to understand.
Okay.
And it can even lead to subtle bugs.
Right.
So it's important to periodically review your code and maybe use techniques like version control history or scream tests to identify and safely remove code that's no longer needed.
So we're not just like randomly deleting code.
Right.
We're strategically identifying and removing code that we really don't need anymore.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about PHP's type system.
Okay.
I'll admit I haven't fully embraced type hints and return types in my code.
Okay.
What am I missing out on?
Type hints and return types are like adding guardrails to your code.
Okay.
They help you catch errors early and make your code more predictable.
Okay.
It's like making sure you're using the right ingredients in a recipe. It leads to a much better outcome.
So it's not just about making the code more readable, it's about preventing those runtime surprises that can be so frustrating to debug.
Exactly. And PHP even supports union types now.
Okay.
So you get more flexibility while still maintaining that type safety.
Right.
Plus, you can use type hints and return types in closures.
Oh, wow.
You can even bring that precision to your anonymous functions.
Nice. Okay. I'm starting to see the light here.
Right.
Now let's shift gears and talk about the DRY principle.
All right.
Don't repeat yourself.
Yes.
I'm all for writing efficient and elegant code, but in the heat of the moment, I've definitely been guilty of duplicating code.
I think we all have.
So what are some practical techniques for sticking to that DRY principle
Yeah.
and writing code that's both concise and reusable?
The key is to look for patterns of repetition and then extract those patterns into reusable components.
Okay.
Instead of copying and pasting that same block of code over and over,
Right.
create a function or a class that encapsulates that logic. And then just call it whenever you need it.
So it's about taking a step back and looking for those patterns and figuring out how to make them into reusable pieces.
Right. And this saves you time and keystrokes.
Yeah.
But it also makes your code more readable, easier to test, and much easier to maintain in the long run.
Okay, DRY principle, check.
Check.
Now, conditions, those pesky if statements,
Oh, yeah?
they can get out of hand so quickly.
Heck yeah.
Any tips for taming those conditional beasts
Yeah.
and keeping our code clean and manageable?
One common issue is deeply nested if statements.
Right.
They can make your code really hard to follow.
Yeah.
A good technique is to use guard clauses to handle those special cases early on.
Okay.
This reduces the need for all that nesting.
So guard clauses are like those if statements at the beginning of a function that check for something specific and then return early if it's true.
Exactly. It's like a bouncer at a club.
Oh, okay.
Checking if you meet the criteria before letting you in.
I like that analogy.
Yeah. And don't forget about the match expression
Oh, yeah.
introduced in PHP 8. It's like a supercharged switch statement.
Right.
It gives you more flexibility and conciseness when you're dealing with multiple conditions.
So we've got guard clauses and match expressions.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Absolutely. The null safe operator,
Okay.
also introduced in PHP 8. It's like a safety net for your code.
Okay.
It helps prevent those dreaded null pointer exceptions.
Yeah, those are no fun.
No. You can access properties and methods of an object without having to check if the object is null first.
Okay.
It's like saying, if this object exists, do this, otherwise just move on.
Right.
It simplifies your code and makes it more robust.
Okay. Null safe operator noted. Now let's dive into databases. I know database transactions are really important,
Yes.
especially for keeping data consistent when we're doing complex operations.
Right.
But I'll be honest, I've always found them a bit intimidating.
Okay.
Can you break them down for me?
So think of a transaction as a unit of work.
Okay.
It groups a bunch of database operations together and makes sure that either all of them succeed or none of them do.
Okay.
It's like transferring money between bank accounts.
Right.
You wouldn't want the money to be withdrawn from one account without being deposited into the other.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Exactly. Transactions prevent those kinds of inconsistencies
Okay.
by rolling back the changes if any part of the operation fails.
Gotcha. So it's about making sure our database operations are atomic.
Yes.
They either complete fully or not at all.
Exactly.
How does Laravel handle transactions?
Laravel makes transactions super easy to implement.
Okay, good.
You can use the DB transaction method and wrap your database operations in a closure. Laravel handles all the behind-the-scenes stuff of managing the transaction.
That sounds pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it is.
Are there any situations where transactions get tricky?
Yeah.
Like when we're dealing with queued jobs?
You're right. Queued jobs can add some complexity.
Okay.
But Laravel has a solution for that too.
Okay.
It's called the after commit method.
Okay.
It lets you specify jobs that should only run after the transaction has been successfully committed.
So it's like saying, don't send those confirmation emails until we're absolutely sure the order's gone through.
Exactly. It's all about maintaining that data integrity.
Right.
And avoiding inconsistencies that could cause problems later.
Makes sense. Now let's talk about writing testable code.
Sure.
It's not just about writing the tests.
Right.
It's about writing the code in a way that makes it easy to test.
Yeah.
What are some of the key principles or techniques we can use to make our code more testable?
One of the most powerful techniques is dependency injection,
Okay.
like building with Lego blocks. Each block is a different part of your application,
Right.
and you can easily put them together and take them apart. This makes it much easier to test individual components in isolation
Okay.
without worrying about all the other parts of your application.
So dependency injection is about decoupling those different parts of the application,
Exactly.
making them more independent and easier to test.
And this decoupling also makes your code more flexible and adaptable.
Okay.
You can swap out different implementations without rewriting a ton of code.
Right.
So it's a win-win for testability and maintainability.
Okay. Dependency injection. It's about Lego blocks, loose coupling, and making our code more testable and flexible.
I like it.
Now let's talk about data transfer objects.
DTOs.
DTOs.
Okay.
I've always used arrays to pass data around. Why should I even bother with DTOs?
DTOs bring structure and clarity to your data.
Okay.
While arrays are flexible, they can also be kind of messy.
Yeah, you never know what's in there until you look.
Exactly.
Yeah.
DTOs are like those labeled storage containers you see in a well-organized garage.
Okay.
Everything has its place.
Right.
They're classes that define a very specific data structure,
Okay.
making your code more readable and easier to understand.
So we're moving away from those free-form arrays and defining a contract for how our data should be structured.
Exactly. And this makes your tests more precise and reliable, too.
Okay.
You're not just checking if an array has the right keys and values.
Yeah.
You're making sure the data follows the defined structure. This gives you much more confidence in your tests.
Gotcha. Okay. DTOs. Check.
Check.
Now, you mentioned fake facades earlier as something to avoid.
Yeah.
Why are they bad, and what's the right way to use facades?
Fake facades kind of look and act like Laravel facades,
Okay.
but they're not actually registered with the service container.
Okay.
They often rely on static methods, which makes them harder to test.
Right.
It's like they're pretending to be facades, but not following the rules. This can lead to some weird behavior
Yeah.
and make things hard to debug.
So it's like they're creating these hidden dependencies.
Exactly. Stick to true dependency injection
Okay.
and use classes that are registered with the service container.
Right.
This makes your code more testable and gives you more flexibility and control over those dependencies.
Okay. Fake facades we see right through you.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about performance.
Right.
You talked about the N+1 query problem earlier. That's that cascading effect where we end up running way more queries than we need to.
Right.
What's the best way to avoid that?
Laravel's eager loading feature is your best friend here.
Okay.
Instead of doing a separate query for each related record,
Yeah.
Eager loading lets you fetch all that data in one go.
Oh, okay.
This reduces the number of queries significantly
Nice.
and improves the performance of your application.
So it's like bundling those related queries into one efficient package.
Exactly. Laravel actually has a debug mode that can help you find those N+1 query problems.
Oh,
If you enable this mode in your development environment,
okay.
you'll see exactly where those extra queries are coming from.
Gotcha.
And then you can optimize your code and keep things running smoothly.
All right. Eager loading, another tool in our belt.
Yes.
Now let's talk about controllers.
Okay.
They're kind of the entry point for a lot of our application logic,
They are.
but they can get really messy really fast.
Yeah, they can.
What are some ways to keep our controllers lean, mean, and easy to manage?
The key is to avoid having your controller methods call other controller methods.
Okay.
This creates unnecessary dependencies,
Right?
and it makes your code harder to understand and test.
Yeah.
So instead, extract that shared logic
Mm-hmm.
into dedicated service classes or action classes.
So it's like creating those reusable building blocks again,
Exactly.
taking the logic out of the controller and
Yeah.
putting it somewhere where it can be tested and reused better.
You got it. It's a small change,
Okay.
but it can have a big impact on how organized and maintainable your code is.
Yeah.
And it makes testing much easier
Right.
because you can test those service classes or action classes on their own
Mm-hmm.
without having to worry about the controller logic.
Okay, so chatty controllers, we're silencing them
Yes,
with service classes and action classes.
exactly.
Now let's move on to security.
Right.
What are some common security traps that Laravel developers should know about?
Okay.
And what can we do to protect our apps from them?
One common mistake is hard-coding sensitive information, like API keys or database passwords,
Right.
directly into your code.
Yeah, that's a big no-no.
It's a security nightmare waiting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Use environment variables instead.
Okay.
Laravel's .env file is a great way to manage these variables
Right.
and keep them out of your code base.
So it's about taking those credentials out of our code
Mm.
and putting them somewhere safe,
Exactly.
where they can be managed better and kept out of version control.
And this also makes your application more portable.
Okay.
You can deploy your code to different environments without having to change those hard-coded values,
Yeah.
making deployments much smoother.
Okay, hard-coded credentials, gone.
Gone.
Now, package routes.
Yeah.
Those are the routes that packages automatically register with their application.
Mm-hmm.
I can see how those could be a security risk.
Yeah.
How do we make sure those package routes aren't left open in production?
Okay, so carefully read the documentation for any packages you're using.
Okay.
Pay attention to the routes they register and understand what they do.
Right.
If they're routes you don't need in production,
Mhm.
Laravel lets you disable them.
Okay.
It's like having a security guard at the entrance to your application.
Right.
Making sure only the right requests get through.
So be proactive,
Yeah.
understand those package routes,
Right.
and take control of them before they become a problem.
And don't forget about documentation.
Yeah.
Good documentation can be like a security checklist,
Okay.
making sure you haven't missed any potential vulnerabilities.
Yeah. Documentation, not just for new developers, but for keeping our apps secure.
Exactly.
So we've covered a lot here,
Yeah, we have.
from auditing and testing to bug fixing and code improvements.
Mm.
Are we ready to say our Laravel apps are battle ready?
We're getting there.
Okay.
Building battle-ready applications is an ongoing journey.
Right.
And remember, even with all these tools and techniques, security is never truly finished.
So what other security things should we be thinking about?
Okay. Well, one area that often gets overlooked is the principle of least privilege.
Okay.
It's all about giving users and processes only the permissions they absolutely need.
So it's about minimizing the damage if an account is compromised or a process goes rogue.
Exactly.
How do we do that in a Laravel app?
You start by carefully defining roles and permissions within your app.
Okay.
Don't just give everyone admin access.
Right.
Think about what each user needs to do and give them permissions based on that.
Okay.
Laravel has built-in authorization features to help you with this.
So we're creating boundaries to limit the impact of any breaches.
Exactly. And don't forget about database security.
Right.
Sanitize all user input before it goes to your database.
Okay.
This helps prevent those nasty SQL injection attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Laravel has some handy helpers for escaping and sanitizing data.
So treat all user input as potentially harmful.
Yeah, it's better to be safe than sorry.
Okay.
And you might even want to use a WAF,
A what?
a web application firewall.
Okay.
It adds an extra layer of protection between your app and the outside world.
So it's like a bodyguard for our app.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It could block bad traffic and stop attacks before they even get to your app.
Okay, WAF noted.
Good.
We've talked a lot about the technical stuff.
Yeah, we have.
But security is not just about code, is it?
You're right. It's about people and processes, too.
Okay, so what about the human side of things?
Have a strong password policy in place.
Okay.
And make sure your team uses strong, unique passwords for all their accounts.
So it's about creating a culture of security awareness.
Exactly. And keep those dependencies up to date.
Right.
New security vulnerabilities are found all the time.
Yeah.
Package maintainers are always working on patches.
Mm-hmm.
So update regularly using Composer.
To get those latest security fixes.
Right. It's an ongoing process.
Okay, so it's not a one-time thing. We need to stay on top of it.
Definitely. And one final thought.
Okay.
Embrace code reviews.
Yeah.
Having another person look at your code can catch those security issues
Okay.
before they go live.
So code reviews are good for security, too.
Yes. Very important.
We've learned a lot today about battle-ready Laravel apps.
We have.
What's the main thing you want listeners to take away from this?
Remember that building these applications is a journey, not a destination.
Okay.
Be proactive, stay informed about security threats, and never stop learning.
Great advice.
The Laravel community is a great resource,
Mm-hmm.
so ask questions, share what you know, and help each other build amazing things.
Awesome. Well said. Thanks for joining me today.
It was my pleasure.
And to everyone listening out there, go build those amazing battle-ready Laravel applications.
Yes, go build great things.
Until next time, happy coding.